Hi, this is Yogesh. In this lecture, I'm going to cover what is MVC, then architecture of MVC, then we'll see what is the difference between ASP.NET Web Form and ASP.NET MVC. Then we'll also create our first MVC based application and we'll see what is the MVC project structure. MVC stands for Model, View and Controller. It's a design pattern which has three important key players. First one is the model, which represents the business entity on which the overall application operates. Second one is the view, which represents the visualization of model and their validation. And the third one is the controller, which is the mediator between view and model. So whenever any request comes from the client or a browser, it always goes to the controller. So let's understand the MVC architecture diagram in detail. You can see the browser sends the HTTP request to IIS, that is the Internet Information Server, which is a web server who hosts your MVC based application. Then based on the routing definition, IIS passes this request to controller. We will see what is the routing in the next lecture, but for now just assume that IIS passes this request to controller via routing configuration. The controller then communicates with the model and passes the populated model to view, that is your front end. Views are populated with the model properties and passing the response to the browser through IIS via controller, which invoke the particular view. So you can see whatever the request is come from the browser, that is the HTTP request, it always pass it to the controller. Then based on your request, controller either communicate with a model first or a view first. In this slide, we'll talk about what is the difference between the ASP.NET Web Form and the ASP.NET MVC. So many developers from the ASP.NET Web Form background, they want to understand why there is a ASP.NET MVC coming into picture if we have a ASP.NET Web Form. So remember guys, MVC is not the replacement of the Web Form, but yes, it's a alternative of ASP.NET Web Form. So let's discuss some important difference between the Web Form and MVC. So first difference is separation of concern. Means each layer is independently run or test without depending on another layer. So here ASP.NET Web Form doesn't have a SOC, that is the separation of concern. Now why? Because there are two files in ASP.NET. First one is the ASPX file, that is a design page, and ASPX.cs file, that is a code behind file. These two files are tightly coupled with each other. But in MVC, it supports a separation of concern because every layer is a loosely coupled layer. Second difference is testability. In web form, it's difficult to test each layer because there is no SOC. In MVC, testing is much simpler as it supports SOC. Then third difference is web form has a concept called view state, which maintains the state of the data between the postback. It stores this data at a client side with a large size, so it affects on the performance. But in MVC, there is no concept of view state. Then the fourth difference is ASP.NET Web Form uses server controls, which is heavy in nature and running on the server side, which causes performance issue. In MVC, it uses the HTML control, so it's faster than ASP.NET. In web form has a limited control over the HTML, but in MVC we have a full control over the HTML using a Razor engine. That will coming into a next lecture. Final thing is ASP.NET Web Form used for small scale application and MVC used for large scale application. So depending upon your requirement, either we go for a ASP.NET Web Form or either we go for a ASP.NET MVC. Let's create a first MVC project. I'll open Visual Studio 2013. Let's choose the file, new project. Choose a ASP.NET web application and choose your language is Visual C#. I'll copy this path under the location folder and then I'll give my application name is my first MVC app. So let's check on this OK button. Now you can see there are number of templates we have. Okay, so we need to choose a MVC as a template. Let's go with the OK button. So here this is our first MVC based application get created. So I'll just open the Solution Explorer and we just try to understand what is the folder structure of MVC. So first and the very important one is the controller folder. It contains all the controller classes. Then we have a view folder which contains all the view associated with controller action defined in a controller. Note the subfolder for every controller within the view folder. Then we have a model folder which contains your business entity. Then we have a script folder. So all the important JavaScript library get included over here. So by default Microsoft provided a bootstrap library, then the jQuery libraries. Then you can also include your custom JS file over here. Then we'll move to the app.stat folder. So basically here we can set up our bundling, then our routing configurations, then filter configuration under this folder. Then we have a global.asx file which is the startup file. So you can see your application is start from the global.asx file. Then we have a web config file. So this is a XML file. In that we can keep all the application level settings. And finally we have a content folder. So in a content folder we can keep our style sheet. So again you can see by default we have a bootstrap cascading style sheet is available. So you can also keep your own style sheet over here. So this MVC based application give you a folder structure. So every folder has their own meaning. We can also choose the empty MVC based application. So if you choose that, then this folder structure is not available in that case. Okay, so in this lecture we understood key players in MVC and their responsibility and how they communicate with each other. We can also see the architecture diagram, then difference between a web form and the MVC, and then we created our first MVC project and we have also seen the project structure of MVC.
Thank you for watching.